one by one, could you say yes or no if you agree that we don't want foreign actors meddling in our elections? Ms. Weiser, let me start with you.
So if you stop right there, you might be mistaken to believe that Marjorie Taylor Greene is just asking a straightforward question. But just wait till you find out what she's actually asking about.
That is correct. We don't want foreign actors meddling in our elections.
As Director of DC Board of Elections, I make no opinion statements.
No, that's a yes or no, Ms. Evans.
I provide no opinions in my role as the Executive Director of the District of Columbia.
So you're
Board of
unable to
Elections.
have it. How do you do your job if you can't give an opinion or an answer? Seems like you'd be unfit to serve in the job that you have if you're unable to provide a yes or no answer on foreign actors meddling in United States elections.
So look at that, Marjorie Taylor Greene not understanding the concept of impartiality or the idea that maybe somebody's role isn't to have an opinion on a particular thing. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene has no experience with not having an opinion on something.
My job is to administer the laws as they've been provided in the District of Columbia, and I perform my job with integrity, and I know my job well, and that is my responsibility.
So you're unable to say no, so we'll take that as a yes. You agree with foreign actors meddling in United States elections. Mr. Spies?
Strongly oppose it.
Mr. Cuccinelli?
Also oppose it, including non-citizens voting.
I agree.
And there it is. That is what the question was actually about. You see, Marjorie Taylor Greene is running around conflating the idea of foreign actors influencing our elections with undocumented folks voting, which is pretty ridiculous, but it just shows the kind of tactics that Republicans love to use. Like,
The House passed a resolution of disapproval with 42 Democrats voting with Republicans about the D.C. law that was passed last year called Local Residents Voting Rights Amendment Act. Local, you would think that would be United States of American residents, not non-citizens. But that allows this law passed that you obviously support foreigners meddling in our elections, is foreign diplomats, people that work at embassies, illegals, and foreign nationals allowed to vote in the District of Columbia elections.
of course, there's been a bunch of scandals about Republican officials who have been caught having connections to different foreign agents and things like that. But of course, instead of focusing on anything like that, Marjorie Taylor Greene is fear-mongering about undocumented folks voting, when in the reality is, undocumented folks should be able to vote. Like anybody who lives inside of the United States, regardless of citizenship, should be allowed to vote. Because if you live here, you're subject to our laws, you're subject to American taxes. Yes, even undocumented folks are subject to taxes. And so I think you should have the ability to vote. In fact, the United States is pretty ridiculous in the way that we narrowly restrict voting. I mean, quite literally throughout its entire history, the United States has never had universal voter enfranchisement. There's always been segments of the population that are not allowed to vote. And those segments of the population also tend to be some of the most marginalized people. It's almost as though the United States was founded on a system of white supremacy that was specifically designed to prevent certain people from voting. So yes, unironically, I think 100% that people who aren't citizens, undocumented folks, people in prisons should all be allowed to vote. I also think homeless people should be allowed to vote, because it turns out in a lot of places around the country, homeless folks are not allowed to vote. And on top of that, there are actually some folks living on reservations that are not allowed to vote because they don't have a proper address. And all of these systems, once again, are designed specifically to bolster the representation of white folks in the United States and to ensure that people of color are greatly underrepresented in terms of who is actually allowed to vote. But this is just a clear case of ridiculous Republican nonsense. Well, they'll take one word and try to make it mean something completely different. And before anybody comes at me saying that you think that undocumented folks shouldn't be allowed to vote, or that people who aren't citizens yet shouldn't be allowed to vote, I need you to explain to me exactly why. Same thing goes with prisoners. Prisoners, believe it or not, are not going to be a big enough voting block to make crime legal, and that's not a thing that any individual prisoner would really vote for. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how elections work. Same goes with everybody else. In fact, I think it's more important to hear from the more marginalized people when it comes to any system of democracy. So anything that's going to actively empower people who are systematically disenfranchised is going to be better, because then you'll actually get people who deal with some of the worst components of society that have a real voice and say in how society is run, so that maybe perhaps things could actually get a little bit better. I mean, quite literally, it's one of the reasons why our political system is so shameless, because homeless people are almost across the entire country denied the right to vote. There are a ton of politicians who basically categorically ignore homeless people entirely. And if you're somebody who's struggling financially, politicians might care about you right up until the point that you yourself become homeless, and then all of a sudden, people don't care anymore. And you can see this in the way both the media and politicians talk about homeless folks, in the way that they are so dehumanizing. And the same is true for undocumented folks and prisoners as well. And I fundamentally think that dehumanization is categorically evil, but is unfortunately something that is incredibly normalized in our society. And so honestly, in my opinion, if you do not have solidarity with the homeless, with undocumented folks, and with people who are incarcerated, then you really can't call yourself a good leftist, because you are failing to be there for the most marginalized people in our society, the people who are most impacted by our harmful systems that we should be standing up for. And so respecting the humanity of those folks by just even agreeing with the statement that they should be allowed to vote is really the bare minimum when it comes to having any degree of solidarity.